My biological mother found me 27 years after she gave me away. She cried when she saw me. That would have meant more if she'd remembered my birthday. Ethan, Victoria Whitmore whispered, reaching across the table. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do this. I looked at her hand but didn't take it. We were sitting in a private dining room at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants. Victoria wore a cream designer suit. Beside her sat my biological father, Richard Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Development. I'd seen his face in business magazines plenty of times. I just never expected to see it across a dinner table. Richard cleared his throat. Your mother means we've regretted what happened. What happened? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Losing you. Interesting choice of words. You didn't lose me. Silence. You gave me away. Richard's jaw tightened. We didn't invite you here to argue about the past. Then why did you invite me? Victoria quickly answered. Because you're our son. I almost laughed. 27 years without a birthday card. 27 years without a Christmas present. 27 years without a phone call asking whether I was alive. Now I was suddenly their son. 3 weeks earlier, a private investigator had appeared outside my office. 2 days after that, an attorney representing the Whitmore family contacted me. Then came Victoria's first call. She cried. She apologized. She told me she'd thought about me every day. Apparently she'd thought about me so often that when she tried to prove she remembered my birthday, she named the wrong month. That was when I started asking questions. Tonight, I finally got my answer. The door opened. A young man walked in. He was thinner than his photographs online. Pale skin, expensive clothes hanging loosely from his frame. Victoria immediately stood. Ryan, sweetheart, you should be resting. I wanted to meet him. Ryan Whitmore, my younger brother, the son they kept, the son they raised in mansions and private schools, the son whose photographs filled their family foundation's website while I grew up believing my biological parents simply didn't want me. Ryan sat across from me. So you're Ethan. Apparently, he gave me an uncomfortable smile. I've always wanted an older brother. Really? His smile weakened. When did you find out you had one? Nobody answered. That told me enough. Dinner arrived. For 20 minutes, Victoria talked about family. Richard talked about second chances. Ryan told me how much he hoped we could start over. Then I put down my fork. Which one of you is going to ask? Victoria froze. Ask what? I looked at Ryan. The kidney. His face went white. Victoria's hand tightened around her wineglass. Richard leaned back. So there it was. I hadn't been wrong. Ryan stared at his plate. Victoria whispered, Ethan, please, how bad is it? Ryan said nothing. Richard answered, end-stage renal disease, and you need a transplant. Ryan finally looked at me. Yes. I nodded slowly. Now everything made sense. Why hire an investigator now? Why send lawyers now? Why suddenly care about the child they'd abandoned almost 3 decades ago? Because their favorite son was dying. And apparently I had something he needed. Victoria reached toward me again. We wouldn't ask if there were another option. I pulled my hand away. You haven't even known me for a month. Your family. No, I'm biologically related to you. That's different. Richard's expression hardened. Ethan, you're 29 years old. You're healthy. The doctors have explained that a person can live a completely normal life with one kidney. I stared at him. You already talked to doctors about me. Tiny pause. Wrong pause. About the situation. Richard corrected. I leaned forward. How do you know I'm healthy? Victoria immediately jumped in. We only meant. How do you know? Nobody answered. Ryan looked away. That bothered me more than anything else. I stood. Victoria panicked. Please don't leave. Because Ryan could die. There it was. Not because you're our son. Not because we want you back. Because Ryan could die. I looked at the 3 of them. Tell me something. Richard sighed impatiently. What? If Ryan's kidneys were perfectly healthy, would I be sitting here tonight? Victoria's lips parted. Nothing came out. I turned to Richard. He was a businessman. Men like him usually had answers ready. He didn't. Finally, Ryan spoke. Ethan, I never wanted them to pressure you. I looked at him. Then tell them to stop. He swallowed. I just mean that I don't want you thinking I'm trying to take something from you. Good. I grabbed my coat. Then we're done. Victoria stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Ethan. I reached the door before Richard's voice stopped me. We're prepared to compensate you. I turned around. Victoria stared at him. Richard. He ignored her. $5 million. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't believe him. Then I laughed. Richard frowned. What exactly is funny? You spent the first half of dinner telling me blood can't be measured in money. I looked at him. Now you're putting a price on my kidney. This isn't a purchase. What would you call it? A way to secure your future while saving your brother's life. My future is already secure. His expression changed slightly. He didn't believe me. That was fine. Almost nobody knew what I actually did. Richard apparently thought I was some mid-level investment professional who had done reasonably well for himself. He had no idea that Northstar Capital, the private investment firm his own executives had been trying to get a meeting with for months, belonged to me. I preferred keeping it that way. For now. Richard stood. You're making an emotional decision. No. I opened the door. For the first time tonight, someone at this table is making a decision about my body. His face darkened. You may regret walking away from this family. I looked back at him. Which family? That shut him up. I left. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of my car when my phone rang. Claire Bennett. I answered. How'd the reunion go? They want my kidney. Silence. Then Claire said, You're kidding. No. Jesus. Ethan. I looked through the window at the Chicago skyline. I need you to do something. Claire was one of the best investigative attorneys I'd ever worked with. More importantly, she was one of the few people I trusted. What? Dig into Richard and Victoria Whitmore. How deep? All the way back. She went quiet. Ethan, what are you looking for? I thought about Victoria crying. Richard offering $5 million. Ryan insisting he didn't want to pressure me while doing absolutely nothing to stop his parents. But one question bothered me more than everything else. The Whitmores had money. They'd had money 27 years ago. They hadn't been teenagers. They hadn't been homeless. They hadn't been desperate parents unable to feed another child. So why give me away? Find out what happened after I was born. I said, hospital records, adoption records, family trusts, lawyers, payments, anything you can legally get. Claire understood immediately. You don't believe the story they told you. I don't believe any of it. Okay, give me a few days. And Claire. Yeah. Don't let them know we're looking. She paused. Then her voice became serious. You think there's something bigger? I stared at the restaurant behind me. Through the window, I could still see Victoria standing near the table. Richard was arguing with her. Ryan sat silently between them. For 27 years, those people had lived perfectly well without me. Then Ryan needed a kidney. Suddenly I was family. I think they didn't lose me. I said, I think they got rid of me. And I want to know why. I ended the call. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Victoria. Please don't do this. Ryan is your brother. A second message arrived. Whatever happened in the past, he doesn't deserve to die for it. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I typed 4 words. Neither did I. Mom, I didn't send it. I deleted the message instead, because she hadn't earned that name. And somewhere in Chicago, buried beneath 27 years of money, lawyers, and carefully protected family secrets, was the reason Richard and Victoria Whitmore had thrown away their first son. I intended to find it, and if the truth was what I suspected, they were going to wish they'd never found me. 3 days after I refused to give Ryan my kidney, my biological mother went on television. She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. I was drinking coffee in my office when Claire walked in and dropped her phone on my desk. You need to see this. On the screen, Victoria Whitmore sat across from a local morning show host. Perfect hair, conservative blue dress, red eyes. She looked devastated. I've made mistakes as a mother, she said softly. Mistakes I will regret for the rest of my life. The host leaned toward her. But you've recently reunited with your oldest son. Victoria nodded, wiping away a tear. Yes, after 27 years. And at the same time, your younger son is fighting kidney failure. Another tear. What I want more than anything is for both my boys to be healthy. I don't want to lose either of them. I paused the video. Claire folded her arms. She never asked you for a kidney. Not on camera. She never said you refused. No. She didn't even identify you. Nope. Claire gave a humorless laugh. She's good. She didn't become Victoria Whitmore by accident. I pressed play. The host asked whether there was hope for Ryan. Victoria lowered her eyes. We're praying for a compatible donor. That was it. No accusation. No demand. No lie obvious enough to sue over. Just enough truth arranged in exactly the right order. I handed Claire her phone. How long before someone connects the dots? They already have. She opened another page. The headline read, Whitmore family reunites with long-lost son as younger heir fights for his life. Another, could Ryan Whitmore's brother be the match that saves him? Then came the comments. How can you watch your own brother die? I donate without thinking twice. Some people care more about money than family. I leaned back. Fast. It gets better, Claire said. She showed me Ryan's Instagram. He'd posted a black screen with white text. Please don't attack my brother. He's been through things I can't understand. It's his body and his decision. I love him regardless. I read it twice, then smiled. Claire stared at me. Why are you smiling? Because that's clever. It's disgusting. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Ryan hadn't defended me. He'd confirmed the accusation without technically making it. He was the dying younger brother begging the public to show mercy to the selfish older brother who wouldn't save him. And judging by the comments, it was working beautifully. Claire pulled out a chair. You want PR involved? No, Ethan. Your name will be public by tonight. Let it. You're getting dragged for something you didn't do. I refused to donate. You refused to be coerced into donating. People don't care about that distinction yet. Exactly. I looked at her. Yet, Claire knew that tone. You found something. No, but they think I'm embarrassed. I turned my monitor toward her. Whitmore development stock had fallen slightly after rumors about Ryan's health surfaced. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, they think public pressure will make me panic. Claire slowly smiled. And you're going to let them think it's working. Now you're getting it. My assistant buzzed me. Mr. Cole, there's a Richard Whitmore downstairs. Claire raised an eyebrow. That was quick. Send him up. Richard entered 10 minutes later without waiting to be invited. He closed the door behind him and looked around my office. North Star's name wasn't anywhere visible. To outsiders, the building belonged to a holding company. I had spent years making sure my private life stayed private. Richard apparently still believed I was simply an executive with a nice office. Your mother is devastated, he said. Good morning to you too. This isn't funny. I agree. He sat across from me. You saw the interview. I did. She never mentioned you. That must have taken enormous restraint. Richard ignored the sarcasm. Things are getting out of control. No, things are going exactly where you wanted them to go. His eyes narrowed. You think we arranged this? I think Victoria Whitmore has spent 30 years dealing with reporters. She knew exactly what would happen. Watch how you speak about your mother. I laughed. That's the second time you've tried that. Tried what? Using titles you haven't earned. Richard's jaw tightened. Then he placed a folder on my desk. I didn't touch it. What is that? An offer. There it is. 5 million was clearly insufficient. Richard, 10 million. I stared at him. He continued. Tax considerations can be handled separately. We'll also establish a trust in your name. You would never need to worry about money again. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. How much do you think I make? He looked surprised. This isn't about your salary. Humor me. I don't know. 500,000. Maybe more. I smiled. He mistook it for interest. Ethan, $10 million changes a person's life. I'm sure it does. And you'd be saving Ryan. Then why are we talking about money? His expression hardened. Because you clearly don't respond to family. No, I respond to family very well. I picked up a framed photograph from my desk. Daniel and Margaret Cole stood beside me at my college graduation. Dad's tie was crooked. Mom was crying. They had driven 12 hours because airfare for 2 people was too expensive that year. I turned the photograph toward Richard. These are my parents. His eyes dropped to it. A mechanic and a school secretary. My smile disappeared. Careful. Richard leaned back. They did what they could for you. I respect that. But don't romanticize poverty because you're angry at us. Something inside me went very still. You know what Daniel Cole did when I needed braces at 13? Richard said nothing. He worked Saturdays for 8 months. I leaned forward. You know what Margaret did when I got into college? Still nothing. She cashed out part of her retirement savings before I found out and stopped her. I pushed the folder back across the desk. They had almost nothing, and they gave me everything they could. I looked him directly in the eye. You had everything, and you gave me away. Richard stood. You don't know what happened. Then tell me. Silence. There it was again. That hesitation. Not guilt. Calculation. What happened 27 years ago? I asked. It was complicated. Try me. Your mother and I were young. You were 31. His face changed. I'd done my homework. You owned 2 properties. Your father was worth more than $80 million. Money wasn't the issue. Then what was? Richard looked at me for a long moment. Finally, he picked up the folder. Some things are better left in the past. That sentence told me more than an answer would have. I stood. Then we're finished. You need to think carefully about what you're doing. Is that a threat? Advice? He walked toward the door, then stopped. Your life is going well right now. I waited. It would be unfortunate if this controversy affected your career. There it was. I smiled. Richard frowned. Something amusing. You came here to buy my kidney. My smile widened. When that failed, you threatened my job. I didn't threaten anything. Of course not. He opened the door. 10 million. The offer stays open for 48 hours. Keep it. Richard looked back. You may not always have the luxury of being this arrogant. The door closed. I waited 5 seconds. Then I called Claire. She answered immediately. How bad? He threatened my career. She laughed. Actually laughed. What? He thinks he can get you fired. Apparently. From North Star. Don't ruin the surprise. That made her laugh harder. Then her voice changed. I found something. I stopped smiling. What? Your original birth records. I sat down. And there's a sealed attachment to your hospital file. What kind? I don't know yet. But the filing date is 6 days before Richard and Victoria signed the papers that transferred you out of their custody. 6 days. Medical. Looks like it. My fingers tightened around the phone. What else? There was a lawyer involved. Harold Mercer. He handled estate planning for Richard's father. Estate planning. Yeah. That didn't fit the story I'd been told. Not yet. Claire continued. And Ethan. Go ahead. 2 weeks after you were removed from the Whitmore household, Richard received an amended position in the family trust. I stared at the wall. How much? I don't have the complete document yet. Get it? I will. Claire. Yeah. Find Mercer. A pause. He'd be in his 80s now. Then find him before the Whitmores do. I hung up. For 27 years, Richard and Victoria had allowed everyone to believe their first child had simply disappeared from their lives. Now I had a medical document, an estate lawyer, the family trust, and a 6-day window connecting all 3. My phone buzzed. Another news alert. Long-lost Whitmore son identified as Ethan Cole. So much for anonymity. A second notification appeared. My inbox began filling. Reporters, strangers, people calling me a monster. I closed all of them. Then another email arrived. This one came from Claire. One attachment. A scanned page from an old legal ledger. I opened it. There was my birth name, Ethan Richard Whitmore. Below it was a notation referencing a medical evaluation and an amendment to the Whitmore Family Trust. And beside that, Richard's signature. I stared at it for a long time. My biological father had told me some things were better left in the past. Unfortunately for him, I'd built my entire career by finding things powerful men wanted buried. And now I knew exactly where to start digging. Claire found Harold Mercer 2 days later. He was 83, retired, and living outside Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. More importantly, he agreed to meet me. You're sure about this? Claire asked as we pulled into his driveway. No, that might be the first time I've heard you say that. Enjoy it. Mercer opened the door before we knocked. He was thin, silver-haired, and walked with a cane. The moment he saw me, His expression changed. Not confusion, recognition. "You look like your grandfather," he said. I stopped. "You knew who I was." "I knew the moment Ms. Bennett gave me your name." He invited us inside. I didn't waste time. "Why did Richard and Victoria Whitmore give me away?" Mercer stared at me for several seconds. Then he sighed. "I wondered if you'd ever come asking. So there is an answer." "Yes." "Then give it to me." Claire placed a recorder on the table. Mercer nodded his consent. "Your grandfather, Charles Whitmore, created the family trust before Richard took control of the company. Charles didn't trust his son. That makes two of us." Mercer almost smiled. Then his expression turned serious. The trust wasn't just about money. It controlled voting rights in Whitmore Development. How much? At the time, enough to determine who controlled the company. Now I understood why an estate lawyer had been involved. Mercer continued. "When you were born, Richard was preparing to become the primary beneficiary, and I caused a problem." Mercer looked uncomfortable. "You underwent genetic screening." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What did they find?" "Possible hereditary condition. The result wasn't definitive. Your doctors recommended follow-up testing." "Possible." "Yes." "So I wasn't sick." "No, but Richard thought I might become sick." Mercer nodded. Claire leaned forward. "What did that have to do with the trust?" Mercer looked at her. Charles had written an unusual succession provision. If Richard's branch of the family developed certain serious hereditary medical issues, trustees could reopen the succession structure. I stared at him. My medical record threatened Richard's inheritance. Potentially. One word. That was all it took to explain 27 years. I stood and walked toward the window. I'd spent most of my childhood inventing explanations for why my biological parents had given me away. Maybe they were poor. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were too young. Maybe something terrible had happened. Every explanation had given them some humanity. The truth gave them none. They got rid of me for money. Mercer didn't answer. He didn't need to. Claire asked the next question. "How?" Mercer removed his glasses. "Richard wanted the medical record separated from the family file. I refused. So he found someone else." "Yes." "And Victoria." I turned back. "Was she involved?" Mercer's silence answered first. Then he said, "She signed the documents." That hurt more than I expected. I laughed once, quietly. "So she wasn't manipulated?" "No. She knew exactly why they were giving me away." "Yes." "And then, you were placed through a private adoption arrangement with the Coles." "Eventually." I frowned. "Eventually." Mercer looked down. "There was another family first." Claire and I exchanged a glance. "What happened?" "The placement failed after several weeks. Then Daniel and Margaret Cole entered the process. I remember Dad teaching me to change a tire. Mom staying awake all night when I had pneumonia. Two people with almost no money had chosen the child two millionaires had discarded." I sat down again. "What happened to the medical condition?" Mercer looked directly at me. "You didn't have it." I already suspected the answer. Hearing it still felt like being punched. "Follow-up testing. Negative." "When?" "About 8 months later." I went still. "Did Richard know?" "Yes." "Victoria?" "Yes." "And they still didn't come back for me?" Mercer lowered his eyes. "No." That was the moment something inside me changed. Until then, some stupid part of me had believed there might be a line they hadn't crossed. There wasn't. They had abandoned me because I might threaten their money. Then they learned I was healthy, and still left me behind. For 27 years. Until Ryan needed an organ. I stood. "Do you have copies?" Mercer looked at me. "I kept records of everything I personally handled." Claire immediately asked. "Because Richard Whitmore asked me to destroy them." That almost made me smile. Mercer disappeared into another room. When he returned, he carried an old document box. He placed it on the table. Inside were copies of trust amendments, correspondence, medical summaries, and letters bearing Richard's signature. Then I saw one with Victoria's. I pulled it out. It was dated 3 days before I was surrendered. One sentence caught my attention. "We agree that permanent placement is in the best interest of all parties and protects the family's future interests." The family's future interests. Not my future. There's. Claire looked at me. "Ethan, I'm fine. You don't look fine. I said I'm fine. Mercer watched me carefully. Your parents made a terrible decision. No. I folded the letter and put it back. They made a calculated decision. There was a difference. Terrible decisions could happen in panic. This had lawyers, documents, trust amendments, medical records. They had discussed me like a liability on a balance sheet. And now they wanted one of my kidneys. My phone rang. Daniel Cole. Dad. I stepped outside before answering. Hey, you busy? Not anymore. Your mother saw the news. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. She okay. She wants to drive to Chicago and hit somebody with a casserole dish. I laughed. For the first time that day. It was real. That sounds like Mom. Then Dad's voice softened. You don't owe those people anything. Son. One word from Daniel meant more than every tear Victoria had shed on television. I know. You sure? I looked through the window at the box containing the proof of why I'd been abandoned. Yeah. This time I was. After we hung up, Claire joined me. What now? I looked at the lake. Whitmore Development has refinancing coming up. Her eyebrows rose. You've been checking. I check everything. They've been trying to get a meeting with Northstar for months. I know. Claire stared at me. Then she understood. Richard Whitmore thought I was a well-paid employee he could threaten. He didn't know the firm his company desperately needed financing from belonged to me. He didn't know I'd personally rejected 2 requests from his CFO because the debt structure looked terrible. And he definitely didn't know I now had a box proving exactly what kind of man he was. Claire lowered her voice. Ethan, what are you planning? Nothing illegal. That wasn't what I asked. I turned toward her. I don't want their money. Okay. I don't want their house. Okay. I don't want the Whitmore name. She waited. I want them to experience something they've never experienced before. What? Consequences. That evening, back in Chicago, I received another message from Victoria. Ryan's condition is getting worse. Please come home. Home. I stared at the word. Then another message appeared. Whatever you think we did to you, don't punish your brother for our mistakes. I finally replied. You didn't make a mistake. 3 dots appeared immediately. I continued. You made a choice. The typing stopped. I sent one final message. I found Harold Mercer. For almost a minute, nothing happened. Then Victoria called. I declined it. She called again. Declined. A 3rd time. Declined. Then Richard called. I let that ring too. Finally, a text arrived from him. We need to talk. I smiled. 2 days earlier, Richard had told me some things were better left in the past. Apparently the past had become much more important now that I knew where it was buried. I forwarded one instruction to my executive assistant. Approve Whitmore Development's request for a financing meeting. She responded almost immediately. Should I assign the deal team? I typed back. No, I'll handle this one personally. Richard wanted to talk. Fine, we would talk. But next time, it wouldn't happen in his restaurant, on his terms, while he decided what my body was worth. Next time, Richard Whitmore would come to me, and when he walked into that conference room, he would finally learn the truth. The son he'd thrown away to protect his fortune had grown into the man who could decide whether that fortune survived. Richard Whitmore tried to get me fired on Monday. On Thursday, he came asking my company for $240 million. He just didn't know it was my company. Claire walked into my office that morning holding a printed email. You're going to enjoy this. I already know what it says. Then let me enjoy it. She read aloud. Whitmore Development appreciates Northstar Capital's willingness to reconsider our refinancing proposal. Mr. Richard Whitmore will personally attend with CFO Martin Hayes and members of the executive team. She lowered the paper. Personally, that was the idea. Claire sat down. You realize he still thinks you work here. He thinks I'm an investment executive. Are you going to tell him before the meeting? No. During. No. She smiled. Oh, that's cruel. I haven't done anything yet. That was the important part. I wasn't going to manufacture Whitmore's collapse. I didn't need to. Their debt was real. Their bad investments were real. Their refinancing problem was real. All I had to do was stop giving Richard the privilege of controlling the room. At 10:02 a.m., my assistant called. They've arrived. Make them wait. How long? I checked my watch. 40 minutes. Claire laughed. Petty. Richard kept Daniel waiting outside his office for 3 hours yesterday. Her smile disappeared. What? I looked at her. He contacted Dad. Richard had apparently decided that if he couldn't pressure me directly, he'd try the man who raised me. He offered Daniel money. A lot of it. All Dad had to do was convince me to do the right thing. Daniel's answer had been simple. Get off my property. Claire's jaw tightened. 40 minutes isn't enough. No, but it's a start. At 10:43, I walked toward the main conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see them. Richard sat at the center of the table. Martin Hayes sat beside him with 2 bankers and 3 Whitmore executives. Documents were arranged neatly in front of them. Richard looked irritated. Good. My senior investment team was already inside. I opened the door. Richard looked up. Confusion appeared first, then anger. What are you doing here? Nobody else spoke. I walked to the head of the table. Richard stood. This is a private financing meeting. I know. His CFO looked between us. Mr. Whitmore, you know Mr. Cole. Richard gave a short laugh. Unfortunately, that earned a few uncomfortable looks. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table. Richard frowned. Ethan, whatever game you're playing, this isn't the place. One of my managing directors spoke. Mr. Whitmore. I raised a hand. He stopped. Richard noticed. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. I sat down. Then every North Star executive at the table turned toward me. Good morning, Mr. Cole. Silence. Richard didn't move. I opened the financing packet. Let's begin. His face slowly changed. What is this? I looked up. A meeting. Who are you? You know who I am. No. His eyes moved around the room. Who are you here? I almost smiled. Martin Hayes had gone pale. He knew. I'd seen recognition hit him the moment my team addressed me. Richard, Hayes said quietly. Richard turned. What? Hayes swallowed. Ethan Cole founded North Star. Richard stared at him, then at me. No, I said nothing. Hayes continued. He's the managing partner. The room became completely silent. Richard sat down slowly. Months earlier, Whitmore Development had approached North Star for financing after 2 banks refused to extend favorable terms. Richard had apparently spent weeks complaining that North Star's founder was impossible to reach. Now he was sitting 6 feet away from him, his abandoned son. I flipped to the first page. Whitmore Development is requesting $240 million in refinancing. Richard's voice was quieter now. You own North Star? Yes. How much? Claire, sitting near the far end, almost laughed. I answered anyway. Enough. Richard stared at me. Then something changed in his expression. He recovered. Businessmen like Richard survived by recovering quickly. Fine. He straightened his jacket. Then let's keep family matters separate. I nodded. Absolutely. Relief flickered across his face. He thought that helped him. Didn't. I turned to Martin. Your debt-to-equity ratio has deteriorated significantly in 18 months. Martin cleared his throat. We've had temporary pressure from interest rates. Your Dallas project is 38% over budget. We expect stabilization. Your Phoenix development is 6 months behind schedule. One executive shifted uncomfortably. I continued. And you've pledged the same category of collateral across multiple facilities. Richard interrupted. That's common in real estate, not when you're asking me for $240 million. His face tightened. I turned another page. North Star's risk committee recommended against this transaction twice. Richard looked surprised. Then why are we here? Because I wanted to hear your explanation personally. Now he understood. This wasn't an opportunity. It was an examination. For the next 40 minutes, I dismantled their proposal line by line. Inflated projections, hidden liabilities, overvalued properties. Ryan's failed luxury development in Miami. That one interested me. Who approved this? Nobody answered. I looked at Richard. Ryan. His jaw tightened. My son led the project. Your son lost $43 million. It hasn't been realized. That's a creative way of saying nobody wants to buy it. One of my executives coughed to hide a laugh. Richard heard it. His face reddened. Ryan was inexperienced. Then why was he controlling a $100 million project? He's the future of Whitmore Development. I closed the file. There it is. What? The future. Richard stared at me. 27 years ago, you sacrificed one son to protect that future. His eyes sharpened. This is not the place. You're right. I leaned back. This is a financing meeting. I slid the proposal across the table. So let's talk financing. Richard looked at the folder. I gave him the answer he'd traveled from Chicago to New York to hear. North Star declines. His face hardened. You brought us here to humiliate me. No, you had no intention of approving this. Correct. Then why waste my time? I looked directly at him. Because last week you told me I didn't understand power. Richard went still. I wanted to make sure you understood it. Nobody moved. Richard stood abruptly. You think denying one loan destroys my company? No. I remained seated. I think your debt destroys your company. He pointed at me. Don't confuse money with strength. That almost made me laugh. You offered me $10 million for a kidney. I tilted my head. Maybe don't lecture me about confusing money with strength. Richard looked around the room. Every person there had heard it. His face changed. Ethan, sit down. He stared at me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sit. For several seconds. I thought he'd leave. Then Martin touched his arm. Richard. Slowly. My biological father sat back down. I opened another folder. This one wasn't about financing. I placed a copy of Victoria's old letter on the table. Richard saw the date. All the color drained from his face. What is that? You know. He didn't touch it. I added the trust amendment. Then the medical summary. Finally, Harold Mercer's signed statement. Richard stared at the documents. His executives stared at him. You said you found Mercer. He whispered. I did. This has nothing to do with North Star. Correct. So why bring it here? Because I wanted you to understand something. I leaned forward. You didn't abandon a sick child. His eyes dropped. You abandoned a healthy child because you were afraid he might cost you control of a company. Richard said nothing. And 8 months later, when you learned I was healthy, you still didn't come back. His CFO slowly turned toward him. Richard noticed. Everyone out. Nobody moved. Richard's voice rose. I said everyone out. I looked at my team. Stay. That broke something in him. This wasn't his building. Not his boardroom. Not his employees. Not his decision. For perhaps the first time in decades, Richard Whitmore gave an order and nobody cared. I let the silence sit. Then I gathered the documents. Meeting's over. Richard stood. Ethan. Wait. I stopped. His voice had changed. Not much, but enough. What do you want? I turned. What? You found the records. You denied the financing. Fine. He lowered his voice. What do you want from me? Finally. He still thought everything had a price. I walked back toward him. I don't want your money. Then what? I don't want your company. His expression tightened. I don't want your name either. Then what the hell do you want? I looked at the man who had discarded me to protect an inheritance. Nothing. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will. I picked up Whitmore Development's financing proposal and handed it back to him. I'm simply done protecting you from your own decisions. Richard stared at me. You'll regret making me your enemy. I smiled. No, Richard, you made me your enemy 27 years ago. He left without another word. The Whitmore executives followed him. Martin Hayes was last. Before leaving, he paused beside me. Mr. Cole. Yes. His voice was careful. You should know something. I waited. North Star isn't the only lender Mr. Whitmore approached. I assumed not. He told the board this refinancing was essentially guaranteed. Interesting. How much time does he have? Martin hesitated, then answered. 90 days. To do what? Find $200 million. And if he doesn't? Martin looked through the glass at Richard disappearing down the hallway. The Whitmore board will start looking for someone to blame. He left. Claire walked over. That sounded useful. It was. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Your mother wants to know if you're eating properly. I smiled. Then another notification appeared. A news alert. Whitmore Development shares fall after refinancing concerns. Claire read it over my shoulder. So it begins. I shook my head. No. What do you mean? I looked through the conference room window at the Manhattan skyline. This started 27 years ago. Richard had spent his life believing family existed to protect the Whitmore name. He had sacrificed me for it. He had built Ryan around it. He had threatened anyone who challenged it. Now that same company was bleeding, and the man he'd once thrown away was sitting across the table deciding whether to save it. I had chosen not to, but denying the loan wasn't revenge. It was only the first consequence, because while Richard was trying to save his company, Claire was still digging, and if the financial records I'd seen that morning were accurate, Whitmore Development had problems far worse than debt. Problems Richard couldn't solve with money. Problems that could cost him his board seat, his reputation, maybe even his freedom. My phone rang. Claire looked at the screen. "Who is it?" I showed her. "Victoria Whitmore." I declined the call. Seconds later, she called again, then again. Finally, a text appeared. "What did you do to your father?" I read it once, then typed, "Nothing." I sent a second message. That's the problem. For 27 years, the Whitmores had survived because everyone around them cleaned up their mistakes. Bankers extended deadlines. Lawyers buried documents. Employees kept quiet. Family members protected the name. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was going to do something much worse. I was going to stop saving them from themselves. Richard lasted 6 days before he called me. I didn't answer. On day 7, Ryan did. I almost ignored that call too. Then curiosity won. "Ethan." His voice sounded weaker than the last time we'd spoken. "What do you want?" "I want to talk without Mom and Dad." "Then talk." A pause. "Did you really reject Northstar's financing?" I smiled. So that was why he called. Not "How are you?" Not "I'm sorry." Money. Yes. "You know what happens if Dad can't refinance?" I do. Thousands of people work for Whitmore. And that's why Northstar's team is reviewing ways to protect viable projects without protecting your father's bad decisions. He went quiet. "You planned this?" "No, Ryan. Your father borrowed too much money. Your projects lost millions. I just refused to pay for it. My projects." There it was. The Wounded Prince. "You mean Miami?" "Yes. That wasn't my fault. $43 million disappeared under your supervision. The market changed. The market didn't approve a luxury tower without completed zoning reviews." Silence. "Dad said you were jealous of me," Ryan finally said. That actually made me laugh. "Of what?" His breathing changed. "You think you're better than us because you made money?" "No." "Then why are you doing this?" I stood and walked toward the windows of my office. "Because you still think this is about money. What else could it be? 27 years ago, our parents threw me away because they thought I might interfere with Dad's inheritance." Ryan said nothing. "They found out I was healthy 8 months later. Still nothing. They never came back." "Ethan, then you got sick." I let the words hang there. Suddenly they remembered my name. Ryan's voice dropped. "I didn't know that." "Which part?" "All of it." I smiled without humor. "Interesting. What does that mean?" "It means you should decide how many lies you want to tell before I start checking them." He hung up. That afternoon, Claire walked into my office carrying 3 folders. She looked happier than an attorney should ever look while holding financial statements. I found the hole. How big? Potentially catastrophic. She dropped the first folder on my desk. Whitmore Development had been moving money between subsidiaries for years. Not necessarily illegal by itself, but several transactions had been disclosed to lenders in ways that were, at best, aggressively misleading. Then Claire opened the second folder. Ryan's Miami project wasn't just a bad investment. I scanned the documents. "What's Harbor Crest Consulting?" "Exactly." I looked up. Claire smiled. "Shell company. Owned by." "Not Ryan directly." "Of course not. His college roommate." I leaned back. "How much?" $11.8 million in consulting fees over 3 years. That got my attention. "For what services?" "We can't find any." I flipped through the pages. Whitmore money had flowed into a company connected to Ryan. The company had almost no employees, no meaningful office, no obvious product. Then I saw another name, Victoria Whitmore. She knew. Claire tapped the third folder. She approved 2 transfers through the family office. Now it made sense. Richard hadn't just built Ryan into the future of Whitmore Development. He'd protected him. Again and again. Every mistake covered. Every failure explained away, every consequence paid by someone else. Exactly like the kidney. What do you want to do? Claire asked. Nothing yet. She stared at me. $11 million went through a shell company. I heard you. You could put this in front of the board tomorrow. Could. And, and Richard would blame the roommate. Victoria would blame an accountant. Ryan would claim he didn't understand the paperwork. Claire nodded slowly. You want them to turn on each other. I want the truth to reach the right people. That sounded very lawyer-friendly. I learned from you. 3 days later, Whitmore Development held an emergency board meeting. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Martin Hayes called me afterward. Richard knows somebody gave the board the Harbor Crest records. I imagine he's upset. Upset isn't the word. What happened? 3 directors demanded an independent audit. And Ryan, removed from all operational authority until the review is finished. I leaned back. That was faster than expected. Richard fought it. For almost 2 hours. Victoria. A pause. She showed up. That surprised me. To defend Ryan. First. Martin lowered his voice. Then Richard suggested the family office had approved the questionable payments. I smiled. He'd started blaming his wife. Exactly as Claire predicted. What did Victoria do? She accused Richard of knowing everything. There it was. The first crack. By evening, Ryan was waiting outside my building. He looked terrible. His face was pale, and anger had replaced the polished smile I'd seen at dinner. You did this. I kept walking. He followed. I'm talking to you. I stopped. Then say something worth hearing. You sent those records to the board. Can you prove that? His jaw clenched. You want to take my place. That one surprised me. Your place. The company. The family. Everything. I stared at him. Then I understood. Ryan truly believed I wanted what he had. For 26 years. Everyone around him had taught him that being the chosen Whitmore son was the greatest prize imaginable. I stepped closer. Ryan, I don't want your life. Bullshit. I don't want your company. You expect me to believe that. I don't want your inheritance. His face twisted. Then why destroy it? Because your father tried to use it to control me. He shook his head. You've hated me since the moment you found out about me. No, you think Mom and Dad chose me over you. They did. And you can't stand it. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. You know what the difference between us is? Ryan glared at me. When something went wrong in my life, I had to fix it. I pointed toward him. When something went wrong in yours, Dad wrote a check. His face reddened. You don't know anything about me. I know Miami. He froze. I know Harbor Crest. The anger vanished. For the first time, I saw fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure, that company belonged to someone I knew. $11.8 million. Ryan, his breathing quickened. You think you're untouchable because you're sick. Go to hell. No, I stepped closer. You've spent your entire life surrounded by people who protect you from consequences. He stared at me. Mom protects you. Dad protects you. Executives clean up after you. And now they want me to give you an organ. Ryan's face went white. I never asked you. That's your favorite sentence, isn't it? What? I never asked them to. I lowered my voice. You never ask. You just stand there while everyone sacrifices themselves for you. His eyes hardened. You don't know what it's like to be dying. No, I nodded. But I know what it's like to be treated like my life matters less than yours. That silenced him. For a second, I saw something almost human in his expression. Then it disappeared. Dad was right about you. I smiled. And what did Dad say? That giving you away was the best decision he ever made. Silence. Ryan knew immediately he'd gone too far. I felt the words hit, but they didn't hurt the way he wanted them to. Instead, they clarified everything. Did he? Ryan swallowed. Ethan. No, thank you. He looked confused. For what? For reminding me why I'm doing this. I walked away. Behind me, Ryan called my name. I didn't turn around. That night, Claire came to my apartment. I handed her a drink and told her what Ryan had said. She expected anger. Instead, I asked one question. How exposed is Richard personally? She studied me. Financially. Everything. Claire opened her laptop. If the independent audit confirms what we're seeing, Whitmore Development could face lender defaults. Richard could lose his board position. And Victoria, if she knowingly approved improper transfers, she's exposed too. Ryan, depends on what he signed. I nodded. Claire closed the laptop. You're different tonight. Ryan told me Richard considers abandoning me the best decision he ever made. Ethan, I'm fine. This time. I meant it. Because suddenly I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't want regret. I didn't want Richard to call me his son. I wanted him to live long enough to understand exactly what that decision had cost him. My phone buzzed. A message from Martin. Emergency board vote tomorrow. Then another. Richard may be asked to temporarily step aside. I showed Claire. She exhaled. That escalated quickly. I looked at the message. No, not quickly. 27 years. The next morning, Richard Whitmore was removed from day-to-day control of Whitmore Development pending an independent investigation. Ryan lost his executive title. Victoria resigned from 2 charitable boards before they could ask her to leave. And by noon, 3 major newspapers were reporting that the Whitmore empire was facing the worst crisis in its history. At 12:17, Richard called me. I answered this time. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You think you've won?" I looked around my office. "No, you've turned my board against me. Your financial records did that. You attacked Ryan. His transactions did that. You dragged Victoria into this. Her signature did that. His breathing became heavy. You're destroying this family." I leaned back. There it was again. Family. Always useful when Richard needed something. You know what's funny? What? You keep blaming me for things you did yourselves. Don't play games with me. I'm not. I looked at the photograph of Daniel and Margaret on my desk. You abandoned one son. You spoiled the other until he couldn't survive without you. You built your marriage on secrets. You built your company on debt. And now all 4 are collapsing at the same time. Richard went silent. I continued. I didn't create any of those problems. You exposed them. Yes, I thought about that. Then I gave him the truth. Because you spent 27 years believing your choices had no consequences. I paused. I'm the consequence. Richard hung up. 10 minutes later, Claire entered without knocking. She was holding another document. What now? She placed it in front of me. A draft separation agreement. Richard Whitmore and Victoria Whitmore. I looked up. They're divorcing. Not yet. Claire pointed to the date. He had this prepared 3 weeks ago. Before the board investigation. Before Northstar rejected the financing. Before the family started publicly falling apart. I read further. Then I understood. Richard had been preparing an exit. Moving assets. Separating liabilities. And if Whitmore Development collapsed, Victoria was positioned to take part of the blame. Claire watched my face. What are you thinking? I closed the folder. Victoria keeps telling me family means sacrifice. Yes. I pushed the agreement back toward Claire. Maybe it's time she finds out who's being sacrificed next. For the first time since this began. Claire didn't smile. Because we both understood what would happen when Victoria saw that document. Whitmore Development was already cracking. Ryan had lost his position. Richard was losing control. But the Whitmore family was still standing together. That was about to end. And this time, I wouldn't have to tear them apart. I only had to hand them the truth. And watch them do it themselves. Victoria Whitmore waited 3 hours in the lobby before I agreed to see her. When she entered my office, she looked nothing like the woman who had cried on television. No cameras. No perfect makeup. Just exhaustion. "Ethan, Ryan is getting worse. I heard. The doctors don't know how much time he has." I waited. She finally placed an envelope on my desk. "Tell me what you want." "Excuse me. Money. Property. Whitmore shares. Anything." I almost laughed. Richard had offered me 10 million. Now Victoria was offering everything else. "You still think this is a negotiation?" Her eyes filled with tears. "He's your brother. And this is my kidney. He could die. That doesn't make my body yours." She closed her eyes. Then I pushed a folder across the desk. "Before we discuss family, you should read that." Victoria opened it. Her face changed immediately. It was Richard's draft separation agreement. "What is this? Your husband preparing for the collapse." She flipped through the pages. Then she found the section assigning liability for several questionable family office transactions. Her hands started shaking. No, he wouldn't do this. He already did. Richard told me we were handling this together. Apparently he changed his mind. She looked up. Why are you showing me this? I leaned back. Because now you know what it feels like. What? To discover your own family has decided you're expendable. She went silent. 27 years ago, Richard and Victoria had removed me when I became inconvenient. Now Richard was preparing to do the same thing to her. I gave up my son for that man. She whispered. No. Her eyes snapped toward me. Don't rewrite history. I pointed at the old adoption document. You signed too. Victoria started crying. Richard convinced me it was necessary. And 8 months later, she froze. The follow-up tests showed I was healthy. Her face went pale. You knew, Ethan. You knew I wasn't sick. And you still didn't come back. She looked down. For once, she didn't make an excuse. Yes, one word. Finally, the truth. Then Victoria walked around my desk and dropped to her knees. Please save Ryan. I stared down at her. I'll give you everything I have. I don't want it. Then tell me what you want. Her voice cracked. I looked at the woman who had given me away and remembered Margaret Cole working extra hours so I could go to college. I wanted a mother when I was 2. Victoria stopped crying for a second. I wanted one when I was 6, when I was 12, when I graduated high school. Ethan, but I don't need one now. She covered her mouth. You don't get to come back 27 years later because your favorite son needs something from my body. Victoria slowly stood. Before leaving, she asked one final question. Will you let Ryan die? No. She looked confused. I hope he finds a donor. I opened the door. But it won't be me. That evening, Victoria confronted Richard. By midnight, the argument had spread through the entire Whitmore mansion. Claire sent me a recording from someone close to the family. Victoria was screaming. You were going to blame me. Richard shouted back. You signed the transfers. Because you told me to. Then Ryan's voice appeared. What transfers? Silence. Victoria finally snapped. Your father was preparing to leave us before the company collapsed. Dad, Richard tried to explain. Ryan wouldn't listen. You said Ethan was destroying this family. Nobody answered. Because for the first time, Ryan understood something I'd learned as a child. Richard Whitmore loved his family only while they were useful to him. The next morning, Claire came into my office carrying another folder. This is worse. Inside were records from the Whitmore's private medical consultants. I checked the dates, then checked them again. They found me before Victoria contacted me. Claire nodded and requested preliminary medical information. I turned the page. There was a transplant consultation, then a proposed surgery date, all arranged before our first family dinner. I stared at the documents. They already planned the transplant. Yes, they never intended to ask me. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. Suddenly every event made sense. The reunion, the tears, the family dinner, the money, the television interview. They hadn't found a lost son who happened to be a possible donor. They had found a possible donor, then decided to call him their son. My phone buzzed. Another news story appeared. Richard Whitmore was preparing to hold a press conference about the family dispute. Claire looked at me. He's going public again. Good, good. I closed the medical file. For weeks, I kept the ugliest evidence private. Richard apparently thought my silence meant weakness. He wanted the public to judge me. Fine. I picked up my phone. Get North Star Communications ready. Claire understood immediately. What are you releasing? Nothing until Richard speaks. And after, I looked at the transplant schedule. After he tells America what kind of son I am. I slid the document across the desk. I'm going to show them what kind of parents they are. Richard Whitmore held his press conference on Friday. By noon, every major Chicago outlet was covering it. By 2, the story was national. I watched from my office as Richard stepped behind the podium. Victoria stood beside him. Ryan sat in a wheelchair, pale enough to make the entire scene look exactly the way Richard wanted. Claire stood beside my desk. He brought his sick son in front of 50 cameras. He needs sympathy, Richard began. My family has remained silent while a private tragedy has been turned into a campaign against Whitmore Development. Claire laughed. Silent. I said nothing. Richard continued. My eldest son, Ethan Cole, has every legal right to make decisions about his body. Careful beginning. Then came the part he'd prepared for. But rights also come with moral responsibility. He looked toward Ryan. My younger son is dying. We never demanded that Ethan sacrifice his life. We only asked whether he would consider helping his brother. Reporters immediately started shouting questions. Did Ethan refuse to donate? Was he a compatible match? Richard lowered his head. I won't discuss private medical matters. Perfect. He hadn't accused me directly. He'd simply allowed millions of people to reach the conclusion for him. Then Ryan took the microphone. Please don't hate Ethan. His voice was weak. He grew up without us. He's angry, and he has every reason to be. He paused. If something happens to me, please don't blame my brother. Claire stared at the television. That might be the most manipulative thing I've ever heard. Give Richard another 5 minutes. My phone was already filling with headlines. Dying Whitmore heir defends brother who refused to help. Family feud threatens Whitmore empire. Ethan Cole faces backlash. My communications director entered. We're ready. Wait until they're finished. Richard eventually returned to the microphone. Whatever Ethan chooses, he remains our son. I turned off the television. Now, at 2:41 p.m. Northstar released my statement. Contained no insults, no accusations, only one sentence from me. Since Mr. Whitmore has chosen to discuss our family history publicly, I agree that the public deserves the complete history. Below it were the documents. The first proved Richard and Victoria had voluntarily surrendered me. The second contained the medical evaluation that had frightened them. The third showed the Whitmore family trust provisions that made my possible condition a threat to Richard's inheritance. Then came Victoria's signed letter. Permanent placement is in the best interest of all parties and protects the family's future interests. Within minutes, the press conference changed. A reporter shouted, Mr. Whitmore, did you give Ethan away to protect your inheritance? Richard froze. Another held up her phone. Did you know follow-up testing later showed Ethan was healthy? Victoria turned toward Richard. Ryan looked confused. What? Richard stepped toward the microphone. These documents are being presented without context. Then I released the next set. Records showing the Whitmores had located me weeks before contacting me. Medical inquiries followed. Then the preliminary transplant consultation. Finally, the proposed surgery date. Before our first dinner, the room on my television exploded. Mrs. Whitmore, did you locate Ethan because Ryan needed a kidney? Was Ethan's medical information obtained before he consented? Why was there already a proposed transplant date? Victoria went white. Ryan stared at his mother. Mom. She reached for him. He pulled away. Did you know? Ryan. Sweetheart. Did you know? Richard grabbed the microphone. This is a deliberate attempt to destroy my family. One reporter shouted back. What context makes scheduling your abandoned son's transplant before asking him acceptable? Richard had no answer. That clip was everywhere within an hour. The public reaction reversed almost instantly. People began deleting the comments they'd left about me. Former supporters of the Whitmores demanded explanations. Several charitable organizations removed Victoria's name from upcoming events. Then things became worse. At 4:18 p.m., Whitmore Development announced that its independent audit had uncovered financial irregularities requiring referral to outside counsel. Trading in the company's shares was temporarily halted. Claire looked at me. You didn't release that. No, the board did. Exactly. That was the beauty of it. I didn't have to invent their crimes. I only had to stop helping them hide from consequences. At 5:03, another headline appeared. Whitmore board suspends Richard Whitmore pending investigation. Ryan had already lost his position. Now Richard had lost his. Victoria's social standing was collapsing by the hour, and the family name they'd sacrificed me to protect was becoming toxic. My phone rang. Richard. I answered. For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then, you son of a bitch. Interesting opening. You planned this. No, you released private family documents. You made our family a public issue. You destroyed my company. I looked at the Whitmore stock chart frozen on my monitor. No, Richard, you borrowed the money. You signed the disclosures. You protected Ryan's bad deals. You hid the liabilities. I paused. I just stopped keeping your secrets. His voice dropped. You think this makes you powerful. No, you think humiliating your own father makes you a man. My father is in Ohio fixing a transmission right now. Silence. I continued. His name is Daniel Cole. Richard breathed heavily. You'll regret this. You've been saying that since the first time I refused you. This isn't over. No. I looked at Claire. It's not. I ended the call. Claire raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I opened the latest audit summary. Richard's problems were no longer limited to losing his company. Several transactions had attracted regulatory attention. If investigators concluded the disclosures were deliberately false, Richard could face far more than financial ruin. But that wasn't the part that interested me most. I handed Claire another page. She read it, then looked up. Victoria had provided documents to the independent investigators. She was cooperating. Richard's plan to sacrifice his wife had backfired. Now she was sacrificing him first. And Ryan, he'd hired his own attorney. The Whitmore family had finally reached the point where every member needed protection from the others. I leaned back. Remember when Victoria told me family should sacrifice for family? Claire smiled. Apparently she changed her mind. No. I looked at the 3 separate legal notices. She finally learned how the Whitmores define sacrifice. My assistant knocked. Mr. Cole. Yes. There are reporters downstairs. Tell them I have no comment. And there's someone else. Who? She hesitated. Ryan Whitmore. Claire looked at me. What does he want? I don't know. 5 minutes later, Ryan entered. No wheelchair this time. He looked weak, but anger kept him standing. You got what you wanted. I remained seated. Did I? Dad's gone from the company. Ryan threw a newspaper onto my desk. Mom is talking to investigators. I heard. Our accounts are being reviewed. The house may have to be sold. I said nothing. He stared at me. You've taken everything. That made me stand. I took nothing from you. Don't give me that. Your father lost control because of his decisions. I stepped around the desk. Your mother signed those transfers. Another step. And you moved almost $12 million through Harbor Crest. His face changed. That wasn't your money. Silence. Your responsibility. More silence. I nodded. There it is. Ryan clenched his fists. You hate me because they chose me. I looked at him. No. Yes. You do. No. Ryan. I stepped closer. I pity you because they chose you. He stared at me. If they'd kept me, maybe I would have grown up believing consequences were things other people paid. His face reddened. You think you're better than me. I think I became stronger without them. That hurt him. I could see it. Then he whispered, You're enjoying this. I thought about it. Yes. His eyes widened. I didn't pretend otherwise. I'm enjoying watching people who spent 27 years believing they could do anything finally discover the word no. Ryan stared at me. Then he said, If I die, that's on you. I shook my head. No. I opened the door. Your illness isn't my crime. He didn't move. And my kidney isn't your inheritance. Ryan's face twisted. For a second, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he walked out. Claire watched him disappear down the hall. That was cold. It was true. That evening, I drove to Daniel and Margaret's hotel. Mom hugged me before I made it through the door. You look tired. I'm fine. You're eating. Yes. Sleeping. Sometimes. Dad laughed from the couch. She'll interrogate you all night. I looked at them. These 2 people had never shared my blood. They'd never owned a skyscraper. They'd never controlled a family trust. But they'd given me the one thing the Whitmores never had. A home. My phone buzzed. Claire. One message. Federal investigators served warrants on Whitmore development tonight. A second arrived. Richard's attorneys expect charges. I stared at the screen. Margaret noticed. Bad news. I put the phone away. Not for me. 3 months earlier, Richard Whitmore had been one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen. Victoria had been a queen of high society. Ryan had been their golden heir. and I had been the abandoned son they believed they could buy for $10 million. Now Richard was fighting to stay out of prison. Victoria was turning against her husband to save herself. Ryan had lost his position, his reputation, and the protection he'd mistaken for talent. Their mansion was mortgaged. Their company was collapsing. Their family was tearing itself apart. And I hadn't stolen a single dollar from them. I hadn't fabricated one document. I hadn't committed one crime. All I had done was expose the truth. The Whitmores had destroyed themselves. I simply made sure the world was watching. But there was still one thing Richard hadn't lost. The thing he'd sacrificed me for 27 years earlier. The Whitmore name. By the time I was finished, he wouldn't even have that. A year after the Whitmore empire collapsed, Richard asked to see me. His message contained one sentence. I just want 10 minutes with my son. I almost deleted it. Instead, I gave him 10 minutes. When Richard entered my office, I barely recognized him. The tailored suits were gone. So were the driver, the assistants, the mansion, and the confidence. Whitmore Development had been dismantled. Victoria had divorced him. Most of his remaining fortune had disappeared into lawsuits and legal fees. He sat across from me. You look well. I am. He nodded slowly. I lost everything. I said nothing. The company, the house, your mother. Still nothing. Ryan barely speaks to me. Finally, he looked at me. Are you satisfied? I leaned back. You still think I did this to you? You exposed us. I exposed the truth. I looked him directly in the eye. You buried the debt. You lied to your board. You protected Ryan every time he failed. You prepared to sacrifice Victoria when the investigation started. Richard's jaw tightened. I didn't destroy your family. I paused. I just stopped protecting it from consequences. He looked away. For once, Richard Whitmore had no argument. Ryan had eventually received a transplant through the regular waiting system. He was recovering. I hadn't helped him. I hadn't stopped him either. For the first time in his life, Ryan had been treated like everyone else. That was enough. Richard finally asked, what happened to the properties? North Star bought several. A trace of pride appeared in his eyes. So part of Whitmore survived. No, his expression changed. I renamed them. The pride disappeared. Whitmore Center, Whitmore Plaza, Whitmore Lakes. Every name was gone. The family legacy Richard had sacrificed me to protect no longer existed. Was that necessary? He asked. No. Then why? Because the Whitmore name had no value to me. That hurt him more than I expected. He sat silently for several seconds. Then he asked, if we'd kept you, do you think things would have been different? Yes. Hope appeared in his eyes. I destroyed it. I might have become like Ryan. Richard froze. You taught him that his last name made him important. I stood. Daniel Cole taught me that nobody cared about my last name if I couldn't earn their respect. Our 10 minutes were over. Richard walked toward the door. Then he stopped. Ethan. I looked at him. I know I failed you. His voice shook. But I'm still your father. A year earlier, those words might have made me angry. Now I felt nothing. That was when I knew I'd finally won. My father's name is Daniel Cole. Richard's eyes turned red. I opened the door. Goodbye, Richard. He left. I never saw him again. Victoria tried next. 3 months later, she appeared at North Star headquarters. The receptionist called upstairs. There is a Victoria Whitmore downstairs. She says she's your mother. My assistant checked the approved family list. Daniel Cole, Margaret Cole, nobody else. She isn't listed as family. I could have gone downstairs. I didn't. 27 years earlier, Victoria had signed a document removing me from her family. I was simply respecting her decision. 6 months later, North Star opened its new headquarters. Daniel and Margaret stood beside me. Dad kept pulling at his tie. Mom slapped his hand away. Stop touching it. It's choking me, because you tied it wrong. I've worn ties for 40 years, and you've done it wrong for 40 years. I laughed. A reporter approached us after the ceremony. Mr. Cole, who deserves the most credit for your success? I looked at the two people beside me. The answer was easy. Two people who chose me when they had nothing to gain. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked away, pretending his hadn't. The reporter smiled. Your parents. I put an arm around both of them, my parents, and that was the end of the Whitmores. Richard lost his empire. Victoria lost the family she'd sacrificed me to protect. Ryan lost his inheritance and the privilege that had protected him his entire life. And the Whitmore name disappeared from the Chicago skyline. They had abandoned me because they thought I might cost them their future. 27 years later, they found me because they wanted my kidney. They tried to buy me, shame me, threaten me, and when everything failed, they finally wanted me to come home. But they were 27 years too late, because I already had a home, I already had parents, and I had built something greater than anything they could have given me. Once, the Whitmores decided I wasn't good enough to be their son. In the end, they would have given anything to have me back. But this time, I was the one who didn't want them.